I'm Samantha, 32, sitting quietly in the courtroom while my sister Grace publicly destroys me. She's always been worthless, Grace declares confidently, her voice echoing as she claims I'm incompetent to handle our grandmother's inheritance. Her lawyer husband Derek smirks beside her, certain of their victory. Then the courtroom doors open. All rise, the bailiff announces. The judge enters and says, "Good morning, everyone." I stand and respond, "Good morning, Your Honor." Grace's face turns ghostly pale as realization dawns. I am the judge who will decide the fate of our family's inheritance. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Family drama can look different across the country, right? If you've ever dealt with a sibling who underestimated you, hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about family betrayal and the sweet justice that sometimes follows. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. Grace and I grew up in a modest 3-bedroom home in Philadelphia with our parents, Eleanor and Richard Adams. From my earliest memories, Grace was always the louder sister, demanding attention while I preferred books and quiet corners. When I received an A on a spelling test in 3rd grade, Grace tore it up and claimed I had cheated. When I won the science fair in 7th grade, Grace knocked my project over accidentally during the awards ceremony. These weren't isolated incidents, but the beginning of a pattern that would define our relationship for decades. Our parents tried their best to treat us equally, but Grace interpreted every situation as a competition. If Mom complimented my piano playing, Grace would immediately sit down and play a more difficult piece. If Dad praised my report card, Grace would remind him about her popularity at school. "Grades aren't everything," she would say, tossing her hair with practiced nonchalance. Samantha has no friends anyway. Despite sharing a bedroom until I was 14, Grace and I rarely had heart-to-heart conversations. She decorated her side with boy band posters and cheerleading trophies, while my half featured bookshelves and debate team certificates. The physical division of our shared space perfectly symbolized our diverging paths. When I was accepted to Penn State with a partial scholarship, Grace announced her engagement to her high school boyfriend at my celebration dinner. My achievements were consistently overshadowed by Grace's dramatic life events. By the time I graduated from law school, Grace had married and divorced twice, each time scheduling her wedding or a dramatic breakup around my milestones. Her 3rd marriage to Derek Williamson seemed different at first. Derek was a corporate attorney with political ambitions and a charismatic smile that charmed our parents immediately. Finally, someone in the family who understands what I'm going through, I had foolishly thought when they first started dating. Maybe this would be the bridge that brought Grace and me closer. I was wrong. Derek's legal background didn't connect us. It intensified Grace's competitive nature. At Christmas dinner the year they got married, Derek and I briefly discussed a Supreme Court case. Grace interrupted by spilling wine on my new dress, then spent the evening talking about Derek's recent courtroom victory while I cleaned myself up in the bathroom. "You know how clumsy Samantha is," Grace told our relatives with a tinkling laugh. "Always has her head in the clouds. Thank goodness, she's just handling paperwork and not important cases like Derek." What Grace didn't know, what she never bothered to learn, was that I had already begun my judicial career by then, starting as a court clerk and working my way up. While Grace and Derek bought a McMansion in the suburbs and leased luxury cars, I lived modestly, invested wisely, and focused on my career. My appointment to the municipal court bench at 29 was a proud but quiet achievement. I didn't need to broadcast it. Family gatherings became increasingly tense as Grace found ways to exclude me. Sunday brunches were scheduled and canceled last minute, with "sorry you missed it" photos appearing on social media. Holiday gift exchanges featured thoughtful presents for everyone except me. I typically received a generic gift card or bath set with a price tag still attached. "We just don't know what you like," Grace would say with faux innocence. "You're so private about everything." The truth was, she never asked. When our mother mentioned my promotion to a judicial position at Thanksgiving dinner 4 years ago, Grace changed the subject so quickly that most relatives missed it entirely. Later, I overheard her telling our cousin Jennifer, "Samantha's just doing administrative work at the courthouse." Nothing special. Derek encouraged Grace's behavior, whispering in her ear at family gatherings and smirking whenever I spoke. They became a united front against me, though I never understood why. I wasn't competing with them. I wasn't interested in their social climbing or country club memberships. I just wanted family peace. The last normal conversation Grace and I had was at our father's 65th birthday party 2 years ago. I found her alone in the kitchen, uncharacteristically quiet as she arranged cookies on a platter. "Need help?" I asked, reaching for a serving dish. Grace looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Why do you always have to be so perfect?" she asked. "I'm not perfect, Grace. Not even close." "You are to them," she said, nodding toward the living room where our parents were laughing with relatives. "The responsible one. The smart one. The one who never causes problems." "Is that how you see me?" I asked, genuinely surprised. She shrugged and turned away. "It doesn't matter how I see you. It's how everyone else does." She picked up the platter and plastered on her social smile before walking out. That brief moment of vulnerability was the last glimpse I had of the sister I might have known under different circumstances. By the time our grandmother Evelyn fell ill 6 months later, Grace and I were essentially strangers who happened to share parents. I had no idea that Evelyn's declining health would set in motion events that would expose the true depth of my sister's resentment and change our family forever. Our grandmother Evelyn was a force of nature well into her 80s. A retired English professor who traveled extensively, volunteered at literacy programs, and maintained the historic Victorian family home our grandfather had renovated before his death 20 years earlier. While Grace visited Evelyn primarily on holidays and for the occasional Sunday dinner when our parents were present, I had a different relationship with her. Every Wednesday evening for the past decade, I'd bring takeout to Evelyn's house. We'd eat in her sunroom surrounded by overflowing bookshelves, discussing everything from Supreme Court decisions to the mystery novels she devoured. When she was diagnosed with congestive heart failure last year, I adjusted my court schedule to drive her to medical appointments and help organize her medications. "You're like me, Samantha," she told me during one of our final conversations. "You observe before you speak. You listen before you judge. That's a rare quality these days." When Evelyn passed away peacefully in her sleep, I was devastated but not surprised. At 87, she had lived a full life. What did surprise me was Grace's sudden intense interest in helping with funeral arrangements and estate matters. "I'll handle everything," Grace announced at the funeral home, dressed in an expensive black suit that seemed more appropriate for a business meeting than a grandmother's memorial. "Samantha is too busy with work and, honestly, too emotional right now." I was indeed emotional about losing Evelyn, but perfectly capable of fulfilling my grandmother's clearly documented wishes. Grace, however, had already contacted a real estate agent about getting the old house ready to sell before Evelyn was even buried. The initial family gathering after the funeral was held at Evelyn's Victorian home. While relatives shared memories in the living room, Grace led a group through the house, pointing out antiques and artwork as if conducting an estate sale preview. "This grandfather clock would look perfect in your foyer, Aunt Patricia," I overheard her saying. "I'm sure we can work something out when we divide everything up." When our parents' longtime friend Martha mentioned that Evelyn had always said her first edition book collection would go to me, Grace laughed dismissively. "Grandma said lots of things over the years," she replied. "But Derek says what matters is what's actually in the will. And as the oldest grandchild, I'll be making sure everything is distributed fairly." I was 2 years younger than Grace, hardly a significant age gap, but she had always wielded her oldest grandchild status like a weapon. What she didn't know was that Evelyn had updated her will just 3 months before her death, with me present as she reviewed the documents with her attorney, Thomas Harrington. The official will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. Grace arrived with Derek and their matching Louis Vuitton briefcases, looking more like they were attending a corporate merger than a family gathering. Our parents sat quietly in the corner, Dad squeezing Mom's hand as Mr. Harrington began reading. The will was straightforward. Evelyn's substantial financial assets would be divided equally among her 4 grandchildren, Grace, myself, and our 2 cousins from our father's brother. The historic family home and its contents, however, were left specifically to me, with a letter explaining Evelyn's wish that I preserve the property's legacy. "This is ridiculous," Grace interrupted, standing up before Mr. Harrington finished reading. "Samantha obviously manipulated Grandma when she was sick. Derek, tell them this won't stand." Derek cleared his throat authoritatively. "As a practicing attorney, I can assure you this will contain several problematic elements. The undue influence is obvious, and we'll be formally contesting it." Our cousins looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Our parents exchanged worried glances. "Your grandmother was of completely sound mind when she updated her will," Mr. Harrington said firmly. "Judge Wilson from probate court can confirm this, as she specifically requested an independent evaluation of Evelyn's capacity, knowing someone might question her decisions." "Of course you'd say that," Grace snapped. "You've probably been overcharging her for years." What followed was a whisper campaign that spread through our extended family like wildfire. According to Grace, I had isolated Evelyn from the family during her final months, convinced her to change her will, and possibly even hastened her death by messing with her medications. These accusations were not only false, but deeply hurtful coming from my own sister. While I was grieving our grandmother, Grace was inventorying Evelyn's possessions. She showed up at the house repeatedly with helpers who were suspiciously focused on photographing artwork and jewelry. When I installed a security system after finding an empty jewelry box that had contained Evelyn's wedding rings, Grace accused me of acting paranoid and keeping family treasures from everyone. The truth about Grace and Derek's interest in Evelyn's estate emerged a month after her death. My cousin Jennifer called me, hesitant and uncomfortable. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," she said, "but I overheard Derek on the phone at the memorial reception. They're in serious financial trouble, Samantha. Something about investment losses and a second mortgage. He was telling someone they were counting on the old lady's house to solve their problems." This explained Grace's obsession with selling the property immediately. The Victorian home was worth well over $1 million in the current market, not including its contents. When I stopped by the house unexpectedly the next day and found Grace and Derek with an art appraiser, the pieces fell into place. Just getting things valued for insurance purposes, Derek claimed smoothly, but the notepad in his hand clearly showed calculations of potential sales prices. "Interesting," I replied, "especially since several items seem to be missing already." Grace's face flushed. "We're just borrowing a few things temporarily. As family heirlooms, they belong to all of us." "That's not what Grandma's will says," I reminded her. "That will is a joke," Derek interjected. "And we'll prove it in court." I later discovered that Grace and Derek had second and third mortgages on their home, credit card debt approaching 6 figures, and a gambling problem Derek had hidden from everyone. They weren't just interested in their fair share of Evelyn's estate. They needed everything they could get their hands on to avoid financial ruin. The situation became even more disturbing when Evelyn's caregiver, Maria, contacted me privately. Apparently, Grace had visited Evelyn 3 months before her death, her only solo visit in years, and pressured her to sign documents Derek had prepared. "Your grandmother refused," Maria told me. "She said the papers would disinherit Samantha, and she became so upset that her blood pressure spiked dangerously. I had to ask your sister to leave." This visit had occurred just 1 week before Evelyn updated her will with Mr. Harrington. The timing wasn't coincidental. Evelyn had been protecting me from Grace and Derek's schemes. What Grace didn't realize was that she had inadvertently set in motion the legal battle that would expose everything she had tried to hide. The formal legal challenge to Evelyn's will arrived via courier on a Tuesday morning as I was preparing for court. Derek had filed extensive paperwork claiming I had exercised undue influence over our mentally compromised grandmother. The documentation included affidavits from distant relatives I barely knew, all testifying to my controlling behavior and unhealthy influence over Evelyn. "This is just the beginning," Derek had written in a note paper-clipped to the filing. "Drop the inheritance claims now, or we'll make this very public and very ugly." The threat was clear. As a judge, My reputation was essential to my career. Derek was gambling that I would surrender rather than endure a public legal battle that might raise questions about my professional integrity, regardless of the truth. That evening, my phone exploded with messages from family members. Grace had been busy, contacting everyone from our second cousins to our parents' bridge club friends, spreading a carefully crafted narrative that painted me as a manipulative granddaughter who had taken advantage of an elderly woman. "We're worried about you, honey," my mother said when she called. "Grace says you're not thinking clearly because of your grief. Maybe you should just let the house be sold and split the money for family peace." This was Grace's strategy. Pressure from all sides, making me the obstacle to family harmony rather than addressing her own greed. "Mom, Grandma wanted me to have the house. She told you that many times over the years," I reminded her. "I know, but is a house worth destroying your relationship with your sister?" The irony was painful. Grace had been undermining our relationship for decades, yet I was the one being asked to sacrifice to preserve a peace that had never existed. The campaign extended beyond our family. At a judicial conference the following week, a colleague mentioned that he'd run into Derek at a bar association event. "He was telling some concerning stories about your grandmother's estate," he said carefully. "I thought you should know." He implied there might be financial improprieties involved. Derek was using his legal connections to damage my professional reputation. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore, it was about destroying me completely. Meanwhile, items continued disappearing from Evelyn's house. Despite the security system, I arrived one weekend to find the china cabinet emptied of our grandmother's antique Wedgwood collection. The security footage showed Grace entering with her own key, one I didn't know she had, and methodically packing everything into boxes while talking on her phone. When I confronted her at her home, Derek answered the door. "This is harassment," he said immediately. "We have witnesses who saw those china pieces at our house months ago. Evelyn gave them to Grace last Christmas." "That's a lie," I replied. "Grandma used that china when I had dinner with her 2 weeks before she died." Grace appeared behind Derek, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. "Why are you doing this to me, Samantha? First you turned Grandma against me, and now you're making up stories about theft? Those were my dishes. Grandma promised them to me years ago." As she spoke, I noticed one of Evelyn's crystal vases prominently displayed on their entryway table. It had been in our grandmother's family for generations. "What about that vase?" I asked, pointing to it. "Did she promise you that too?" Grace burst into tears. "See how she attacks me? It's always been like this. Samantha, the perfect one, making me feel worthless. I'm just trying to preserve a few family memories, and she treats me like a criminal." It was a masterful performance. If I had known better, I might have believed her myself. Derek put his arm around Grace protectively, glaring at me. "I think you should leave now," he said. "And be advised that if you continue making these false accusations, we'll add defamation to our lawsuit." As I turned to go, I noticed a stack of mail on their side table. On top was a letter from a casino resort with final notice, stamped across the envelope. Another piece showed the corner of a foreclosure warning. Grace quickly shuffled the papers out of sight, but not before I understood the desperation driving their actions. Their financial situation was even worse than I'd suspected. Further investigation through public records revealed they had taken out a third mortgage on their home just months earlier. Derek's law firm was underperforming, with several clients having filed complaints with the Bar Association. Grace's interior design business existed mainly on social media. She had few actual clients. The most disturbing discovery came from Maria, Evelyn's caregiver. She found a hidden camera in Evelyn's bedroom when packing up her belongings, a camera Grace had installed during a visit, presumably to monitor Evelyn's conversations with her attorney or me. "Your grandmother found it herself," Maria told me. "She was sharper than anyone gave her credit for. She didn't confront your sister, but she did tell Mr. Harrington about it. That's why they met at his office for the final will signing, not at the house." The depth of Grace's betrayal was staggering. She hadn't just tried to manipulate our grandmother's will, she had invaded her privacy during her final months. The revelation made me physically ill. Amid this turmoil came an administrative notice that I initially overlooked. As a municipal court judge, I rotated through different divisions. According to the schedule, I would be handling probate court cases during the upcoming 2-week period. The exact time frame when Evelyn's will contest was scheduled for its initial hearing. Ethical considerations immediately flooded my mind. While I wouldn't be assigned my own family's case, my position created a potential conflict of interest that I needed to address. More importantly, this scheduling coincidence offered an unexpected opportunity. Grace and Derek had no idea about my current judicial assignment. They knew I worked at the courthouse but had never bothered to understand my role there. Their assumption that I was just doing administrative work was about to collide with reality in a way I could never have planned. The question was, how should I handle this unexpected twist of fate? If you've ever been underestimated by family, you know that feeling when they're about to learn the truth about who you really are. It's not about revenge. It's about justice and standing in your truth. I had some serious decisions to make about how to handle this ethical situation while protecting my grandmother's wishes. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to choose between family peace and standing up for what's right. Now, let me tell you what happened next. The ethical dilemma kept me awake that night. As a judge, I held myself to the highest standards of professional conduct. The coincidence of Evelyn's case landing in probate court during my rotation wasn't something I could ignore or exploit. Yet Grace and Derek's relentless attacks had pushed me into a corner. The next morning, I requested an urgent meeting with Judge Patricia Wilson, my mentor since law school and the senior judge who had supervised my judicial appointment. At 72, Patricia had seen everything in her decades on the bench. Her office walls were covered with photos of 3 generations of her family alongside legal commendations and diplomas. "This is quite the situation you're in," she said after I explained everything, professionally and personally. "I know I need to recuse myself from any involvement with the case," I said, "but I'm concerned about how to handle this ethically while also protecting myself and Grandma's wishes." Patricia removed her reading glasses and studied me carefully. "The first thing we need to do is ensure there's no appearance of impropriety. You're right to recuse yourself from any involvement with the probate cases during this period. I'll arrange for Judge Thomas to handle all probate matters for those 2 weeks." Raymond Thomas was a retired judge who occasionally returned to help with overloaded dockets. He was known for his fairness and by-the-book approach. "The second issue," Patricia continued, "is your personal involvement as a beneficiary. You need proper legal representation separate from your position as a judge." "Derek has been telling people I'm using my court connections to influence the case," I admitted. Patricia's expression hardened. "That's a serious allegation against a sitting judge. Has he made this claim formally?" "Not in writing, just verbally to colleagues." "That's still potentially an ethics violation on his part," she noted. "Document everything, Samantha. Every communication, every missing item, every statement they make about you." Following Patricia's advice, I temporarily stepped back from my judicial duties for the specific 2-week period and requested administrative leave. This would remove any possible conflict while allowing me to focus on the case as Evelyn's beneficiary. For my legal representation, Patricia recommended Michael Brennan, a former district attorney who specialized in estate litigation and elder law. At our first meeting, I brought copies of Evelyn's will, the security footage from her house, and the documentation of items Grace had already taken. "Your sister and her husband have made a critical error," Michael said after reviewing everything. "They've built their case on claims that are easily disprovable. We can demonstrate that your grandmother was mentally competent, that you didn't isolate her, and that they're the ones who attempted undue influence." Michael's strategy was comprehensive. Rather than just defending against their accusations, we would counterfile with evidence of Grace and Derek's behavior. "We'll depose Maria and the other caregivers. We'll get medical records confirming your grandmother's mental clarity. And we'll document the pattern of items disappearing from the house," he explained. "But most importantly, we need to understand their financial situation better. That's their motivation, and it's likely worse than what you've uncovered so far." Through legal channels, Michael obtained records showing that Derek's law practice had been sued twice for malpractice, with settlements that had drained their savings. Grace had maxed out multiple credit cards funding her lifestyle blog and social media presence. Most damning, they had a combined gambling debt of over $200,000 at 3 different casinos. They're desperate, Michael concluded. This inheritance isn't just something they want, it's something they need to avoid bankruptcy. Our investigation also revealed a pattern that went beyond Evelyn. Derek's parents had modified their will 2 years earlier, removing him as executor and trustee after discovering unauthorized withdrawals from their accounts. They had kept this private to avoid embarrassing him, but court records told the story clearly. The most powerful evidence came unexpectedly. While helping clear out Evelyn's office, I found a small digital recorder in her desk drawer. It contained audio diary entries she had made during the last year of her life, a project suggested by her doctor to help process her thoughts as her health declined. Grace visited today, Evelyn's voice said in an entry from 3 months before her death. The first time in over a year without Richard and Eleanor. She brought papers she wanted me to sign. Something about making her executor and simplifying the estate process. When I said I wanted to read them carefully first, she became upset. Said I obviously didn't trust her. The truth is, I don't. Not with this. She's never shown interest in the house or my collection before. It's Samantha who loves these things, who understands their value beyond money. I won't be pressured, not even by family. Especially not by family. Other entries detailed Grace's repeated calls trying to change Evelyn's mind, her complaints about me to other family members, and Evelyn's clear reasoning for her estate decisions. The recordings would be devastating to Grace, and Derek's claims that Evelyn had been mentally compromised or unduly influenced. As the court date approached, I struggled with balancing professional ethics and personal hurt. The case would be heard by Judge Thomas, with no involvement from me in my judicial capacity. Still, Derek and Grace didn't know about my recusal or that I had taken leave during this period. They still believed I was just doing administrative work at the courthouse. Michael advised me to keep my judicial position quiet from Grace and Derek until the hearing. It's not about surprising them, he explained. It's about preventing them from creating new allegations about your using your position improperly. Once they see you're handling this ethically by having a different judge hear the case, it undermines their narrative about you. The night before the hearing, Grace called me. Unlike her previous communications, which had been through Derek or attorneys, she reached out directly. It's not too late to settle this, she said, her voice uncharacteristically tense. We can still work something out as sisters. I'm open to discussion, I replied carefully. What are you proposing? Drop the contest over Grandma's will. Let us sell the house and split everything 4 ways like it should have been originally. In return, we'll stop the legal proceedings and keep family matters private. The threat was clear. Proceed with defending Evelyn's will, and they would continue attacking my professional reputation. Grace, I'm honoring Grandma's wishes. That's all I've ever wanted to do. You always think you're so much better than everyone else, she snapped, her conciliatory tone vanishing. So perfect. So ethical. You have no idea what's coming tomorrow. Derek has evidence that will destroy you in court and in your precious career. The call ended with her warning. Last chance, Samantha. Back down now, or regret it forever. I didn't sleep that night, wondering what evidence they might have manufactured. By morning, I was exhausted but resolved. Whatever happened in court, I would face it with the same integrity Evelyn had taught me to value above all else. The county courthouse was already busy when I arrived at 8:30 the next morning. Unlike my usual routine of entering through the judicial chambers, I came through the main entrance and sat in the public gallery of Courtroom 3, dressed in a simple navy blue suit rather than judicial robes. Few people in the waiting area recognized me outside my usual context, which was exactly what I wanted. At 5 minutes to 9, Grace and Derek made their entrance. Grace wore an expensive black dress that seemed calculated to project the image of a grieving granddaughter, while Derek carried a leather briefcase embossed with his initials in gold. They were accompanied by 2 associates from Derek's firm, creating the impression of a formidable legal team. They didn't notice me sitting quietly in the back row. Instead, they arranged their materials at the plaintiff's table with theatrical confidence, Derek whispering instructions to his associates while Grace nodded gravely. Our parents slipped in moments later, looking uncomfortable as they took seats in the middle of the room, deliberately positioning themselves as neutral parties. At precisely 9 o'clock, the bailiff called for attention. All rise. The Court of Common Pleas, Probate Division, is now in session, the Honorable Judge presiding. Everyone stood as expected, but no judge entered immediately. Derek used this moment to address the gathering, speaking just loudly enough for everyone to hear. Before we begin, I want to thank everyone for coming to support us in this difficult matter. As you know, we're simply trying to ensure that our grandmother's true wishes are honored, not the manipulated documents created under duress. Grace nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. It breaks my heart that it's come to this, but Samantha has left us no choice. The bailiff cleared his throat disapprovingly, but Derek continued. We have evidence that will conclusively prove undue influence and testamentary incapacity. We intend to demonstrate that Samantha Adams systemically isolated our grandmother, manipulated her during a vulnerable period, and orchestrated this fraudulent will to disinherit legitimate heirs. He turned slightly, finally noticing me in the back row. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by a smug smile. In fact, he continued more loudly, the defendant herself appears to have finally decided to join us. Perhaps she realized the futility of her position. Grace turned to look at me, her expression a practiced mask of sorrow.
Oh, Samantha.
Even now, you can't do the right thing. You've always been so selfish, so focused on yourself. I tried to protect you from this public humiliation, but you wouldn't listen. Before I could respond, she addressed the courtroom directly. My sister has always been the family disappointment. Behind the quiet facade, she's manipulative and greedy. She works at the courthouse pushing papers and thinks that makes her important. The truth is, she's worthless in terms of actual legal knowledge or ethics. She couldn't even get a real job at a law firm like Derek. The bailiff stepped forward. Ma'am, please save your statements for the official proceedings. Grace ignored him. Everyone needs to know what kind of person tries to steal from her own family. Samantha has been jealous of me her entire life, and this is her pathetic attempt to finally get something I should have. She's always been worthless, and now everyone will see it. The bailiff moved toward the judge's chambers. His honor is ready now. All rise for the Honorable Judge Raymond Thomas, he announced. As everyone stood again, I quietly made my way to the front of the courtroom. Grace was still whispering furiously to Derek, neither of them paying attention as I walked past the gallery railing. Judge Thomas, a distinguished man in his late 60s with silver hair and stern features, entered from his chambers. Good morning, everyone, he said. Good morning, Your Honor. I responded clearly, now standing beside the bailiff rather than taking a seat at the defendant's table. Grace's head snapped up at the sound of my voice coming from the wrong direction. Her eyes widened as she took in my position near the bench. Derek's confident expression faltered, confusion evident as he looked between me and Judge Thomas. Before we begin today's proceedings, Judge Thomas said, I want to address an administrative matter. Judge Samantha Adams, who would normally be assigned to this division during this period, has appropriately recused herself due to her personal involvement in this case as a beneficiary of the estate in question. I will be presiding over all probate matters for the next 2 weeks to ensure there is no conflict of interest. The courtroom fell silent as the implications became clear. Grace's face drained of color. Derek dropped his pen, fumbling as he tried to recover it. Judge Adams has taken administrative leave during this period and will be represented by counsel as a private citizen in these proceedings, Judge Thomas continued. This separation of her judicial role from her personal involvement demonstrates the ethical standards the court upholds. He looked directly at Derek. Mr. Williamson, as an officer of the court yourself, I trust you appreciate the propriety of these arrangements. Derek stood, his composure visibly shaken. Your Honor, this is unexpected. We were unaware of Ms. Adams' position. This raises serious questions about potential impropriety and influence. Judge Thomas cut him off. Mr. Williamson, are you suggesting that the court's administrative procedures are inadequate? Or that I would be improperly influenced in my duties? No, Your Honor, of course not, Derek backpedaled. But the circumstances... The circumstances are that Judge Adams has followed proper ethical guidelines by recusing herself completely from this matter in her professional capacity, Judge Thomas stated firmly. She is here today as a private citizen and beneficiary, nothing more. Now, shall we proceed with the actual matter before the court, or do you wish to continue questioning the court's integrity? Derek sat down heavily, leaning over to whisper urgently to Grace, whose shock had transformed into barely contained fury. Their carefully constructed narrative was crumbling before the proceedings had even formally begun. Michael Brennan, who had been observing quietly, now approached the defendant's table. Michael Brennan representing Samantha Adams, Your Honor. We're prepared to proceed. Judge Thomas nodded. Very well, Mr. Williamson, you may present your challenge to the will of Evelyn Morgan. Derek stood again, attempting to recover his earlier confidence. Your Honor, we contend that the will dated 3 months prior to Evelyn Morgan's death was executed under undue influence and at a time when Mrs. Morgan lacked testamentary capacity. As Derek outlined their case, I noticed Grace frantically texting beneath the table, presumably reaching out to family members or friends who had been enlisted in their campaign against me. The courtroom dynamics had shifted dramatically in the space of 5 minutes, and they were scrambling to adjust their strategy. The first witnesses Derek called were distant relatives who testified about how close Grace had been to our grandmother and how I had supposedly limited their access to Evelyn in her final months. Under cross-examination by Michael, each was forced to admit they had rarely visited Evelyn before her illness and knew little about her daily care or wishes. When was the last time you visited Mrs. Morgan before her death? Michael asked our second cousin Robert. Well, it was probably last Christmas, he admitted reluctantly. And before that, maybe the previous Christmas? We exchanged cards regularly, though. So your testimony about Samantha limiting access is based on what, exactly? Grace told us Samantha had taken over everything and wasn't allowing visitors without her approval. This pattern repeated with each of Derek's witnesses. Their testimonies fell apart under scrutiny, revealing that most of their information came directly from Grace rather than first-hand knowledge. By the lunch recess, the initial confidence of Grace and Derek's team had evaporated. I overheard Derek hissing at Grace in the hallway. Why didn't you tell me she was a judge? Do you have any idea how this looks? How was I supposed to know? Grace snapped back. She never talks about her work. Everyone just said she had some job at the courthouse. Their afternoon strategy shifted dramatically. Instead of attacking my character directly, Derek attempted to focus on technical aspects of the will's execution. This approach faltered when Judge Thomas admitted Evelyn's recorded audio diary into evidence over Derek's strenuous objections. The courtroom fell silent as Evelyn's clear, firm voice filled the room. I'm making these changes to my will with full understanding of what I'm doing. Samantha has never asked me for anything. In fact, she tried to talk me out of leaving her the house, saying it should be divided equally. That's exactly why she deserves it. She's the only one who values it beyond its monetary worth. Another entry was even more damaging to Grace and Derek's case. Grace and that husband of hers came by again today. More pressure to change my will. Derek actually suggested I might be developing dementia when I refused to sign their papers. Imagine using that against your own mother-in-law. I may be old, but I know manipulation when I see it. With each recording, Grace seemed to physically shrink in her seat. By late afternoon, when Maria testified about finding the hidden camera and Grace's infrequent visits, Derek was frantically passing notes to his associates, likely seeking any strategy to salvage their case. The final blow came from Evelyn's physician, Dr. Lewis, who testified about performing a cognitive assessment the same day Evelyn signed her updated will. Mrs. Morgan scored perfectly on all measures of cognitive function, he stated firmly. She was articulate about her wishes and the reasoning behind them. There was absolutely no evidence of diminished capacity or confusion. As the first day of proceedings ended, Judge Thomas announced we would reconvene the following morning for final testimonies and his ruling. Grace avoided looking at me as she rushed from the courtroom, Derek close behind her with his phone already pressed to his ear. For the first time since Evelyn's death, I felt a weight lifting. Whatever happened tomorrow, the truth about Grace and Derek's motivations had been exposed. More importantly, Evelyn's voice, literally and figuratively, had been heard. She had anticipated their tactics and prepared accordingly, protecting both her wishes and me from their manipulation. Outside the courthouse, my parents waited hesitantly by the steps. "We had no idea," my father said, his voice strained. "About your judgeship, about Grace and Derek's financial problems, about any of it." "Grace always made it sound like you were just doing clerical work," my mother added, her expression a mixture of pride and embarrassment. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I did, Mom. Several times. But Grace always changed the subject, and no one ever asked for details." They exchanged pained looks, finally confronting the family dynamic they had allowed to flourish for decades. "We should have paid more attention," Dad admitted. "To both of you, but in different ways." As we parted, my mother hugged me tightly. "We're proud of you, Samantha. So proud. And I think Evelyn would be too." For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt tears threatening. Not from hurt or anger, but from validation. After years of being overshadowed and underestimated, the truth about both Grace and me had finally come to light. Judge Thomas's ruling was comprehensive and left no room for further legal challenges. Evelyn's will was upheld in its entirety, with the house and its contents confirmed as my inheritance. Grace and Derek were ordered to return all items removed from the property within 7 days or face contempt charges. Additionally, Judge Thomas referred the matter to the Bar Association's Ethics Committee regarding Derek's professional conduct throughout the case. The court finds clear and convincing evidence that the plaintiffs attempted to exercise undue influence on the deceased, made false statements to the court, and removed assets that they knew were not legally theirs, Judge Thomas stated. While family disputes are regrettably common in probate matters, the level of deception and manipulation evidenced in this case is extraordinary and troubling. The courtroom was silent as he concluded. This court strongly recommends that the parties seek family counseling to address the underlying issues that have led to this unfortunate situation. Legal victory without reconciliation is hollow indeed. As we left the courthouse, reporters who had gotten wind of the unusual case, a judge being personally involved in a contentious probate battle, approached for comments. Michael fielded most questions professionally, while I simply stated, "Today justice was served, not just for me, but for my grandmother's wishes." Grace and Derek slipped out a side entrance, avoiding the media entirely. I wouldn't see my sister again for nearly 3 months. The professional consequences for Derek were swift and severe. The Bar Association launched a formal investigation into his conduct, focusing not just on the probate case, but on patterns of behavior with other clients. 2 former clients came forward with stories of being pressured to sell assets quickly at below-market rates, with Derek offering connections to buyers who later turned out to be his own shell companies. By summer, Derek had been suspended from practicing law pending the outcome of multiple ethics investigations. His law firm partners, distancing themselves from the scandal, asked him to resign. The financial house of cards he and Grace had built collapsed completely. For our extended family, the case created awkward divisions that only slowly healed. Some relatives who had signed affidavits based on Grace's version of events sent apology cards. Others maintained uncomfortable silence. Thanksgiving invitations became complicated negotiations of who would attend which gathering. Surprisingly, it was our cousin Jennifer who became an unexpected bridge. Having witnessed both sides of the conflict, she organized a small family meeting 2 months after the court case. "This has gone on long enough," she said firmly when several relatives tried to decline. "We're all adults. We can sit in the same room and talk about what happened." That difficult Sunday afternoon at Jennifer's house became the first step toward family healing. Aunt Margaret admitted she'd signed an affidavit without verifying any facts. Uncle Robert acknowledged he'd barely known Evelyn in recent years. My parents expressed regret for enabling Grace's behavior and overlooking my achievements. Grace was notably absent, having declined Jennifer's invitation. Derek, I later learned, had moved out of their home the previous week. The transformation of Evelyn's Victorian house began that summer. Working with a historical preservation society, I converted the first floor into a community legal center focused on elder law and protection services. The elegant parlor where Evelyn had entertained guests became a comfortable consultation room. Her extensive library found new purpose as a resource center for seniors and their families. The Evelyn Morgan Elder Justice Center opened in September, offering free legal consultations, document preparation services, and educational workshops about preventing elder abuse and exploitation. The center became my passion project, a way to honor Evelyn's legacy while creating something meaningful from the painful family conflict. In October, an unexpected email arrived from Grace. "Can we meet? Just us." We arranged to meet at a neutral coffee shop halfway between our homes. Grace arrived first, already seated in a corner table when I walked in. She looked different. The designer clothes and perfect makeup replaced by jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail rather than elaborately styled. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us before Grace spoke again. "Derek and I are divorcing. It's been filed. He's moving to Arizona." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it despite everything. She shook her head. "Don't be. It should have happened years ago. The gambling, the debts, the lies. I knew about most of it. I just didn't want to admit I'd made another mistake." "Another?" "Third marriage, third divorce," she said with a bitter smile. "Not exactly the perfect life I pretended to have." We talked for nearly 2 hours. For the first time in our adult lives, Grace spoke honestly about her feelings of inadequacy, her perception that our parents valued my achievements over her struggles, and the exhaustion of maintaining her facade of perfection. "I was jealous," she admitted finally. "You made everything look so easy. College, law school, your career. You never seemed to doubt yourself or make mistakes. I felt like I was constantly failing in comparison." "That wasn't reality, Grace. I struggled plenty. Failed plenty. I just didn't broadcast it. I know that now." She hesitated. "The legal center you created at Grandma's house, it's really something. I drove by last week. Saw the sign. You should come visit properly sometime," I offered cautiously. "I'd like that." Our reconciliation was slow and fragile. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend quickly or completely. But in small steps, we began rebuilding some version of a sisterly relationship, different from before, more honest if less close. By Thanksgiving, enough healing had occurred that our parents were able to host a family dinner with both Grace and me present. The conversation was sometimes awkward, sometimes strained, but genuine in a way our previous family gatherings had never been. After dinner, I found Grace alone in the kitchen, arranging cookies on a platter, a scene eerily reminiscent of our last normal conversation before everything fell apart. "Need help?" I asked, reaching for a serving dish. This time, instead of a bitter comment, she smiled slightly.
"Sure.
"Thanks." As we worked side by side, she said quietly, "I saw in the paper that Derek's been referred for criminal charges. Financial elder abuse against his own parents." I nodded. "The investigators found a pattern once they started looking." "I should have seen it," she said. "Should have stopped it. We don't always see clearly when we're in the middle of something." She arranged the last cookie precisely. "The center you created, do you need volunteers? I'm not a lawyer, but I could help with administrative stuff. Or design work for the spaces." The offer surprised me. We could always use help. "Are you sure that's something you want to do?" "I need to make amends somehow," she said simply. "Not just to you. To Grandma's memory." The following week, Grace began volunteering at the center 2 afternoons a week. Her interior design skills, previously used primarily for social media content, found genuine purpose in creating welcoming spaces for elderly clients. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, not yet, but it was a beginning. 1 year after Evelyn's death, we held a small ceremony at the center to hang her portrait in the main consultation room. Family members who had been divided by the conflict gathered together, many visiting the center for the first time. "Grandma would have loved this," Jennifer said, looking around at the busy office where seniors were receiving free legal advice, using her home to help others. Grace, standing nearby, nodded. She would have. Samantha understood that about her in a way I never did. Later, as the gathering was winding down, Grace approached me privately. "I've been thinking about what you said in court, about Grandma wanting the house preserved rather than sold for profit. What about it?" "You were right. She loved this old place because of the memories and history it held, not its market value." She hesitated. "I never really understood that until now, seeing what you've created here." In that moment, looking at my sister without the shield of resentment for perhaps the first time in decades, I realized something important. The inheritance Evelyn had truly left wasn't the house or its contents, but the values she had lived by. Integrity, generosity, and the courage to stand in one's truth. "I think we're both still learning what Grandma tried to teach us," I said. "Just in different ways." As I watched Grace interact with our family members with a new authenticity, I thought about Judge Thomas's words, "Legal victory without reconciliation is hollow indeed." He had been right. The true resolution wasn't in the courtroom win, but in the painful, honest conversations that followed. And in the choice to rebuild rather than remain divided. When I look back at that day in court when Grace called me worthless, not knowing I was the judge, I don't feel the vindication I once imagined I would. Instead, I feel gratitude for Evelyn's wisdom in anticipating what might happen, for the painful truth that finally broke through decades of family dysfunction, and for the chance to create something meaningful from the conflict. Sometimes justice arrives in unexpected ways. Sometimes the most important judgments aren't made from behind a bench, but in quiet moments of truth between people who share a history. And sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't what's written in a will, but the courage to live with integrity, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Family relationships can be the most complicated ones we navigate in life, can't they? I'd love to know if my story resonated with any of your experiences. Have you ever had to choose between keeping family peace and standing up for what's right? Comment below and share your thoughts. If this story helped you in any way or gave you a perspective on family justice, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complex family dynamics and finding resolution. Thank you for listening to my journey from being called worthless in court to finding worth beyond legal victories. Remember, sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't material possessions, but the strength to stand in your truth with dignity and compassion.